This is the second lecture on Kenneth Burke, and we're going to get more into terms and specifics with this lecture. This particular slideshow is going to be focused on Burke's key concept, which is identification. Identification is something more than persuasion. I think that one of the really unique things that Kenneth Burke contributes is a sense of persuasion that exceeds the rational. So whereas Aristotle thought in terms of conscious deliberation to change someone's mind, i.e. persuasion, I have an identifiable effect on you, Burke uses the language of identification, and that is a psychological term. And along with these new words come new concepts. We have a different process going on in this theory of rhetoric. In order to understand it, we've got to walk through the stages. We are made up of a variety of substances, and those substances all have names and language to go with them. So I am a woman. I am an employee of the University of Alaska Anchorage. I am a teacher. I'm an English teacher. I'm a writing teacher. I'm a mother. All of these things about me are substances, things that are about me. Some of those things are chosen. Some of those things are genetic. Some of those things are chance. But the way that we begin the process of identification is by sharing substance, that is, by being consubstantial. Consubstantiality is the meeting point, and Burke says that we can only persuade someone. The quotation is, "You persuade a man only insofar as you can talk his language by speech, gesture, tonality, order, image, attitude, idea, identifying your ways with him." So the big umbrella concept that Burke offers is identification. Remember from the first lecture, however, that identification is built on the foundation of division. It is the awareness of our separateness that makes it possible for us to identify and to experience identification. It is the sense of not being a part of one group that makes it possible for us to identify with another group. What we are not has as much to do with who we can identify with as what we are. So never forget that underlying concept in Burke. It's always present. So identification can have three different functions. It's a fairly robust concept and one that Burke theorizes in many ways, whereas Aristotle seems to have some just acceptance of the concept of persuasion. He doesn't want to get above persuasion and talk about what goes on there. I think that Burke is sort of a meta rhetorician. He's talking about the process of persuasion. He's not talking about persuasion itself. I think would be a helpful way of looking at it. So there's three functions of identification. First, it can be a means to an end. It can be an operation of antithesis, or it can be unconscious. So first, the means to an end. The means to an end is created, intentional, and chosen, and it's based on consubstantiality. If I tell you, oh, gosh, I like your dog. Oh, gosh, I have a dog. I am using consubstantiality as a means to an end. I'm intentionally choosing to tell you that you and I share something. I'm attempting to find common ground. We often see speakers doing this for us. In the presidential campaigns, in any sort of campaign, we're going to hear a lot about identification, or a lot about this means to an end. That is, and like you, I'm a parent, or and like you, I've worked hard for my money. It's going to be an explicit sense in which we shared. I have an example on the slide of the Tennessee Vols and playing basketball. And I worked at the University of Tennessee. And because I was at Tennessee, I found a sense of belonging in their sports program and an identification with the colors and the concepts that go along with that. I consciously chose to be consubstantial. That is, I chose to wear orange and white. I watched the games. I kept track. But I have this particular picture to illustrate another aspect of consubstantiality. The person in the picture, her name is Shannon Bobbitt, and she was about 5'2", 5'3". In fact, I think she probably still is. She just doesn't continue to play for the Vols. But she was their point guard, and she was an amazing player. Now, I give this as an example because there are some ways in which I intentionally identify myself with her, or I intentionally create consubstantiality. And that is, I bring awareness of the fact that I played basketball and that I'm 5'3", that I was a point guard. And I find those points of connection as a means to an end, a way of creating an identification or a bond with, a belonging with this particular team, this particular sport, this particular winning program. I think there are a lot of things about a particular sports program that we might buy into. It might be certain values of the coach or whatever. But for me, basketball is particularly an area that I choose to identify myself with because it actually overlaps things that have happened in my own life and that have been valuable to me. So the first way of identifying is by doing so intentionally. We can create it in others, or we can create it for ourselves. We can tell people the ways in which we share substance, or we can choose to notice the ways in which we share substance. One of the most powerful ways that we form identification is through the operation of antithesis. That is, the way in which I am opposed to you helps me form an identification that's even stronger than my chosen way of identifying with you. So I choose to be a fan of the Tennessee Vols. But it's the process of antithesis that makes me a passionate supporter. On the left is Coach Gino Auriemma of the University of Connecticut's women's basketball team. His team is number one. He's won more consecutive games than any coach in history this Connecticut team has. They're meant to be unstoppable, and they've been reigning. Now, he and Pat Summitt, the coach of the University of Tennessee Vols, had a falling out. He's got an attitude that I don't much appreciate, but probably more important, he's the coach of the most competitive team against the Tennessee Vols over the past 10, 15 years. Now, to the right, you see one of the UConn players, whose name I don't know, who I don't particularly feel a sense of antithesis towards. She's a basketball player and a gifted athlete. And on those levels, we have enough shared values and identity for us to be consubstantial. But because she's an extension of this thing called an opponent, because of the operation of antithesis, I separate myself from UConn, and in this particular game would identify with Georgia. Why? Not because I support Georgia. I know nothing about Georgia. Certainly I am not someone who would turn on a game because the Georgia women were playing. The operation of antithesis works in this way then. Your enemy is my friend. Therefore, I heart Georgia because they're playing you. And if they beat you, I heart you even more. So this way in which I powerfully identify you as other makes me then give over my consubstantiality, my identification with this other team, which ordinarily I wouldn't support. Now, I think one of the most unique contributions that Kenneth Burke offers is the notion of identification that is unconscious. And in fact, I believe that the most common way in which we identify ourselves with others and identify others is through unconscious means. Burke believes that we can identify with others without knowing it, and even identify with others against our will. So we may think of ourselves as not racist, but it may still be the case that we identify more strongly with people of our own race, or our own class, or our own age. That there are ways in which we automatically respond to certain sorts of people, not because we're choosing to, but just because we do. Now, I have a picture here of a teacher, a female teacher, standing in front of a chalkboard. And I give that as an example because I think that I probably would have an automatic and unthoughtful and unconscious identification with this person simply because of how she's dressed, the color of her skin, where she's standing, the expression on her face, the jewelry that she's wearing. All of those things happen to overlap with things that are of value and importance to me. So I would be inclined to identify with her, that is, to be encompassed perhaps by her perspectives or to be included in her group without even choosing to do so. And it might be the case if she approached me and asked me for money, I might be more inclined to give her that money, even though I typically would not be willing to give someone money who just walked up to me on the street. In other words, I might identify with her and be persuaded to give her money, even though it's against my will, because this process of identification is so powerful.